Hello and welcome to this episode of CNBC Africa's Entrepreneurial Edge with myself, Tanya Habimana. I'm here joined by the Chief Ecosystem Officer of CG Tech, Jason English.
Just so that you know, the reason for Chief Ecosystem Officer is because fundamentally the CEO, Chief Executive Officer, in my view is like an old, outdated role. Those are people that focus on the numbers of a business. Today, a leader that focuses on the numbers of the business, numbers are a result of all the things you do good and bad. So we call the Chief Ecosystem Officer because my job is to manage the ecosystem, suppliers, clients, employees, communities. If we manage the communities well, if we manage our suppliers well, if we manage our clients well, and if we manage our employees well, the results will come.
I want to know about the man behind all of these businesses. Talk to me about your entrepreneurial journey. How did you get started?
So, it's quite an interesting story. I always wanted to be a doctor growing up, but I was too stupid to get into med school, and so defaulted to a post-matric year where they offered engineering. And I really had three options. So one was mechanical, the other one was electrical, and another one was electronic engineering. And I hated electrical. I didn't want to know anything about electronics, so I decided to default to mechanical. And yeah, that kind of entered me into the mechanical space. And from there, once I graduated, sort of walked into my first job in the oil and gas industry for a services business in the oil and gas sector. Spent a good couple of years there. I was there for about 14 years, so learned a lot through that business. But yeah, I always had this ambition. I thought I'd be the CEO of that business one day, to be quite honest. But we kind of drifted apart in terms of our direction and what I sort of felt was really the type of company that I wanted to work for, and couldn't find it there. So decided, well, let me go create my own one. And so, sort of left in 2012. Sort of took on a business called Promac. It was a very small garage. We're based out of a garage, 3 core people with 100-odd workforce, and yeah, that was kind of the start of it. And then we progressed up, did a couple of acquisitions along the way, expanded into different services along the way. Ended up acquiring this business here in Dubai in 2016. Did a tech startup in the drone business in 2016, which we thought was a great idea. Ultimately, it just became a really expensive hobby. And sort of progressed that in 2020 through COVID into the film industry and into a new software development company. And so, things weren't really planned, but we kind of ended up with a group now where we have 12 businesses. So,
did you ever envision that you would have 12 businesses?
No, not at all. I mean, actually, I used to always fantasize with myself that I was just going to play golf 3 days a week. I was going to just earn a little bit of money, enough to cover my bills, and then I was just going to have fun. And I wasn't going to work very hard. But yeah, I guess the entrepreneurial spirit came out, and the rest was history.
That's great. It's quite an interesting journey. I mean, from wanting to become a doctor to ending up with 12 businesses, several operating across regions. I can imagine that it's been a journey. Do you remember, or let me rephrase actually, what would you say is the first or the biggest mistake that you've ever made?
Sure. I mean, look, I think we make mistakes all the time. I have a saying: if I'm not making mistakes, we're not learning, right? And when it's proof that we're not, making mistakes is proof that we're trying. So, but I would say probably one of the biggest challenging moments that I've come across was definitely early on. Actually, about 3 months into my own business, I had some competitors trying to get me shut down pretty quickly. I think they were a bit fearful of what might happen and where we were and all that. And I ended up going to it was quite a had to get forensic auditors involved, had to get a whole bunch of auditors behind me to come and inspect and have a look, and it was a mess. Anyway, cut a long story short, we managed to get through that, and it became they today have become one of my greatest clients. So that was one area. I think another real challenge that I had at one point was running out of money. It was a stage of my life that was unplanned. I kind of always was meticulous in terms of how much money we had coming in, going out, and managing that. And yeah, at the end of the day, I learned a big lesson where one client doesn't pay you, and all of a sudden it can lead to disaster. Yeah. So it was a very important lesson that I learned quite early on, and I'm glad it happened when it was relatively small and not today.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Because the mistakes made when we're small are big at that time to us, but the bigger we get, the bigger the mistakes, right? What has been the one thing that you would share with your younger self?
Why didn't I start earlier? No, I mean, look, I always joke with myself, what would have happened had I started earlier? But I think the reality is I learned so many lessons along the way of my 15 years in, let's call it, the corporate environment, that I wouldn't have really changed anything. It was a really good experience. I'd probably say to myself, like, study harder in your early stages, because I didn't realize, when I was at school, I was a bit of a hooligan. So, I didn't really take school too serious. I kind of did enough to get by, but actually, when I wanted to become a doctor, I mean, maybe it was, the universe has a funny way of laying out the game, So maybe it was all intentional that I didn't want to be good in school, but I think had I been good in school, I probably would have become a doctor, and that was something that I was really passionate about. But now, in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't. So yeah.
And so, still on your entrepreneurial journey, at some point you used the word "we," and what I've often found is that entrepreneurs will tend to have people that come along for the journey. How do you view this? Do you have a circle of influence, of trusted advisors?
Yeah, so look, firstly, we've got partners. I've got partners. A lot of them are thanks to where we are today, because they've really pushed me. Niall Carroll, who's one of my chairmen. I've got colleagues, Danny DeBarros, Andrew Jackson, David Cummins, who's based in the UK. We've got the guys from Sirius Max and Stephen and the team, and Joseph down in South Africa. And we've got all these people that collectively, when you sit around a table, you essentially share good experiences and best practices. And I think that collective of our minds is really what makes us who we are today as a group. Of course, guys like Niall, and we've got another advisor, Andrew, them pushing us to be better and pushing me to be better has always been part of the plan. And maybe I wouldn't be as ambitious as I was if I didn't have somebody whipping me. But no, I mean, I think I've got that advisory team, and I say it's not really my advisory team, but collectively we advise each other. And then in a personal space, obviously being part of organizations like YPO, where I have my own forum with other CEOs and very powerful and influential CEOs who are also running mega companies. The Altair Group here in Dubai, which is a huge conglomerate. Got people like that I sit every month and kind of chat to about the business and the challenges, and in South Africa I also had my forum, which also was guys that are running mega companies. So from Coca-Cola to Vodacom, so William Mzimba, for example, was in my forum, and so you have all these real influences around you that help, and then I also have Abundance 360, which is based in Los Angeles, which is really a different community. It's a community of futurists, tech entrepreneurs, really successful business people in the tech space, and everything from healthcare to biomed to 3D printing, whatever. And you get to communicate and talk about all your challenges with these individuals, and really that community, I think, stands you in good stead for the future.
Would you recommend an entrepreneur starting out build a community like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does a few things for you, but probably one of the most important is, they say you become who you hang around with, right? So generally speaking, if you hang around with criminals, you kind of end up getting influenced into becoming a criminal. If you hang around with really successful people, generally it rubs off, and somehow you find a way of becoming successful because you want to, I guess, keep up with the Jones, to put it in the blunt sense. So no, I mean, I would definitely say that the community that I've hung around has helped me progress, and I've seen it in stages. Now that you asked the question, I mean, when I was growing up, I was a very ambitious employee, and I was surrounded with other ambitious employees, but I was never entrepreneurial minded or well, maybe I was minded, but I wasn't focused on becoming an entrepreneur. As I was progressing, I started to, within that community where I was operating, meet a lot of entrepreneurs, and I was hanging out with them, and I was going out with them and going on holidays with them, and they were always that much above me, and so I guess that might have started flaunting with the brain to say, well, maybe you need to be doing this. And when the opportunity presented itself, then you took that leap. And then being in that circle of entrepreneurs and people around you and other business owners and your suppliers that are business owners, you start to end up in a different community. And so all of a sudden you find yourself very quickly surrounded by people in different levels throughout your career that make a big difference to who you end up becoming.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. And one thing that I do know about you is you've been here in Dubai for 2.5 years, which, if my calculations serve me right, you must have arrived just before COVID. So how did that happen?
Yeah, so on the 31st of January 2020, the CEO of our Middle East business retired. And so on the 26th of January, I came here with my wife and kids to come and, as part of a recruitment process, to look for a new CEO. And of course, as you know, 4 weeks later, the world fell apart. The borders shut down, flights stopped flying everywhere. And yeah, it became a massive issue. So I thought, well, it'll be 30 days, COVID will be over, like the rest of the world did, and then we'll get on a plane and we'll go back home. Anyway, 30 days turned into 60, into 90, into 180, and before I knew it, we just weren't going home. Kids were in school, we were staying in a house, and it was the longest hotel stay I'd ever stayed in, 5.5 months in a hotel. And yeah, my car was at the airport, so I eventually fetched it in December of 2020 from the airport.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Do you see yourself staying here?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're far too settled in now to go back. Obviously, I have, the house and a lot of my stuff still there in South Africa and haven't sold up. But our lives have changed, the business has changed. COVID has really changed how we think about work in terms of remote work and not having to be in a specific location. So yeah, for me personally, the kids are settled, and that's quite important, and they're really enjoying it here and they're really flourishing, and so I think it would do more damage to go back. I'm flexible, I can travel wherever I want to. My wife's business is still running in South Africa, so she's running it purely remotely from here. Wow. And she's got a great property company in South Africa, and so no, I think I don't see why we would go back now, other than obviously the heart is still there. But the reality is we have big companies here, we've got a big business in the UK now, and so yeah, it's just load shedding and all these challenges that you have in South Africa, like it kind of makes you think differently about going back.
And one thing I'm quite curious to hear from you is you hadn't planned to come here, and it is a different environment. Did you find that operating on a business level culturally was different? Did you have to adapt in any way?
I think the one thing that as South Africans we have is the ability to work with different communities. Like I noticed that big time. Fortunately, I've had experience in the Middle East before because of my previous corporate business. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East, specifically Saudi, Qatar, and all the places around Dubai. But look, South Africans are generally very accommodating and tolerant of different personalities, different cultures. We understand them a lot better than I think many people do, just because of our background. And so I wouldn't say it's necessarily hard. In fact, what was hard for me was stepping in and finding the way that people were being treated. That actually was more of a challenge for me. So, there wasn't necessarily the same respect for different cultures. There wasn't necessarily the same tolerance for different cultures. And I think that was something that I really focused on doing here in the Middle East. And so, we've really pushed to ensure that, it's as fair standards as possible, that accommodation and camps are really well fit for people. Everybody's got branded clothing and branded overalls, and, they get, the basic benefits that we can give them, Wi-Fi and laundry and that sort of thing. And that's not necessarily typical for the Middle East. It's certainly evolving and it's changing, and there's governments are really pushing the behavior of sort of clients that work in the region. but it's still an evolving society. So yeah, I wouldn't say it was a culture shock, but I think that there was a lot of work that we've certainly done to make it more palatable for me, I guess, as a South African.
But now, Jason, the other part of culture is corporate culture. And particularly when you're running an organization that has several companies, a group, how do you ensure that the corporate culture that you envisioned and want to see continues throughout all of your businesses?
Yeah, so look, that's always a challenge. I think at the end of the day, it starts at the top. You know, we kind of create a vision for the group. We clearly define a set of values for the group. And then we sort of have our mission, right? And really, if you look at what we try and achieve, our values are pretty strict and hard and fast. So, you know, it's people first, we have to be agile, we have to be responsible, and safety. So any company that firstly we bring into the group, you know, if they don't have a safety conscious mindset, like they're not going to come into the group. If they don't have a people first mindset, they're not going to come into the group. If they're not agile, you know, maybe we can work on that. And certainly, you know, if they're not responsible, well, then they're not going to come into the group. So I think, you know, having those foundations and at least the rules of the game helps us to determine who comes in to the group. Obviously, then filtering down the businesses is slightly more of a challenge because each business has got its own CEO. A lot of these CEOs are shareholders and partners in the business as well. And so that does make it slightly more challenging because everyone's got their own way of doing things, right? And their own way of working and their own way of dealing with people. But I always say to leaders, like, don't try and change who you are as a leader. Just try and rally people around you that believe in what you believe, because you'll be more successful. I mean, people like Hitler was successful, right? But he had people that followed him that, you know, followed him. I wouldn't follow him. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't good at what he did, you know? So I think you've got to be yourself. You've got to just rally those people around you, and ultimately it will come. And I think we try and then have a common set of values across each business. So we have the same values at group level as we do across all businesses. The visions will obviously change because each business is doing something slightly different. And how we do that in terms of our mission is also going to change. But the overarching theme is, you know, we stick to those values, and I think that keeps a core corporate culture. And the one element, just to add, that we've done really differently is because we're very traditional businesses. We're very clunky, you know, heavy industrial businesses, scaffolding, oil and gas, petrochemical, nuclear, events. Like, these are not your tech businesses, but we have got a tech business within the group. And so what we have found is that our innovation, our drive for innovation, our drive for the adoption of technology is very unique in its way. And by keeping teams as young as we are, so we're a pretty young and dynamic team right across the group, you know, that innovation comes through, and having that technology team on the sideline, what we call our Skunk Works team, keeps driving new initiatives, new technology, new systems, new processes across all the business, kind of keeps us on our toes. And I think it keeps a certain DNA and a certain culture within the business. And you would have seen when you came in here, the Google kind of feel, right?
Yeah.
It's not what you'd expect when you walk into a business like this.
Absolutely not. So then, does your metaverse and tech businesses almost operate as a shared value, and they kind of feed innovation into the other businesses? Is that what I'm...
Yeah, so we've got our verticals, and then our tech business is kind of the horizontal, that we call it the disruptor, right? So it comes in and tries to figure out how can it disrupt our existing traditional operations.
So that speaks to a deliberate effort, at least it sounds deliberate, to kind of have a portfolio that speaks to one another. So what does the CG Tech of the future look like for you?
Currently, we're very much an engineering and construction outfit, just serving different verticals in different markets. You know, in South Africa, big industrial, Middle East, very event orientated and entertainment because of the region here. The UK, very film focused. Okay. And yeah, obviously the tech comes along and kind of disrupts that, as I said. So I would think that in the CG Tech of the future would probably remain traditional in what we know and understand, which is engineering and construction. Mm-hmm. We may see different verticals in different regions. So, you know, when we go to the US, if we go to the US or sort of Asia and Australasia, etc., we may find ourselves sort of digging into a slightly different variant of engineering and construction. But I think the common thread of tech will always apply, and it becomes an enabler that makes us make those markets makes us more efficient and effective in those markets. Having said that, I think a dream or a wish would be, how do we convert the traditional into platform types of businesses so that we could enable other businesses, of other entrepreneurs to become the traditional, where our platforms enable them to do that. So that's a kind of interesting spin that we're thinking about, but we don't have the answers on how we get there yet.
Oh, that's the exciting part, right? And in terms of geographies, do you see yourself expanding to other regions?
Yeah, so Africa is obviously a big play for us, North Africa specifically, and sort of East Africa. These are markets that are largely, I wouldn't say untapped, but they're large opportunistic markets. It's just trying to figure out how you play in there. It's probably not necessarily ripe right now, but certainly they will become ripe, and you hear Africa being put more on the map everywhere you go. I sit in a lot of conferences in the US and the Middle East and East Asia, etc. And you hear Africa more and more and more. In fact, yesterday I was just at a seminar in Spain. I got in this morning, but and they, there was a project, and it was called Africa, bringing Africa to the world and the world to Africa, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of like, I guess, Fly SA's slogan. But so I think that Africa will be a big region for us. I also think the US, any global business not in the US sort of has to question its future growth. So definitely we are thinking about the US. How we play there is another question. Time zone is not our friend, and we really like to stick to the central pillar of time zones within like 3 or 4 hours of each other. The US obviously throws it out completely, but it's such a big market in what we do that not playing there would probably be silly. So we'll see where we end up.
Quite some ambitious plans there. So going back to you, the founder, the man, all of these businesses going into different markets, different geographies, I can imagine it's quite stressful at times. How have you dealt with stress in the past?
So look, rewinding a little bit further back to my past, right? I was in the police force. And so I guess the one thing that the police force, there's two things that the police force, in my view, teaches you. The one is how to manage stressful situations. And the second one is the value of teamwork and systems and processes. And so, I must say, I don't really find myself stressing too much. I think stress is a result of the things that you don't do well. So, if you surround yourself with good people, if you put good systems in place, if you use sort of innovation and tech that's around you, that's available to make your life easier, if you give people the tools and arm them with the budgets, etc., to execute and get on and do their thing, people are amazing spirits, right? So I think very often we create stress because we don't allow people to naturally be the best versions of themselves. So as a leader, my key thing is, how do I make all my leaders around me and CEOs around me be the best versions of themselves, and my management teams, and if I can help them be the best versions of myself, my job and my partner's job just becomes easy, because then we're just really massaging it rather than having to stress every day. So yeah, of course you do get stressful situations. We're in the events industry, for example. We're busy building big stadiums and concert stages, and the artist is coming on Friday night to perform in front of 50,000 people. We can't say, sorry, we're delayed and the stage will be ready next week, So little things like that make it more difficult. But stress is, I go to my meditation space if I need to. I listen to music if I need to, just to calm myself and gather my thoughts, and I try and remain as calm as I can.
And what about during COVID? You're in industries that were quite massively affected. We're talking events, we're talking hospitality, construction. These industries basically came to a halt. How did you deal with all of this?
Yeah, so again, we rallied together our collective group of CEOs. We set out the clear mandate, and we sort of set out 4 priorities. Which these will live with me forever now. But the first one was we had to sustain the businesses at all costs, whatever that meant. It didn't help we were fantastic to all of our people and suppliers, and then we closed our doors, right? So we had to sustain our business at all costs. In the process of sustaining our businesses at all costs, we really focused on doing as little damage to employees. So we let go of nobody during COVID, which, you know, today I'm very proud of, and I think it's really helped us in the rebound, by the way. The third thing that we wanted to do was do as little damage to the communities. I think what we saw, the behavior of a lot of companies was don't pay suppliers, don't continue funding community projects, blah, blah, blah. But everybody was in trouble, right? So we continued to fund community projects. We continued to make sure that our suppliers were paid. We did spend a lot of time with them, just talking to them about who was in crisis, who needed real money, who could manage an extra 30 days, 60 days. So we spent a lot of time communicating with them. And the last one was we knew that this would end. Didn't realize it would end 2 years later. But we had a philosophy that we wanted to emerge stronger. And so in order for us to emerge stronger, there was a few things that we had to get right. So, you know, we didn't really know what success looked like coming out of COVID, but we knew what failure looked like. And failure looked like if we didn't continue to train our people, if we didn't improve our systems, if we didn't look at how we could be better at the things that we could do, if we didn't have idea jams and we didn't look at new product offerings. And so we spent a lot of our downtime in COVID focusing on those. We spent a lot of time training people, a lot of time focusing on the development of new products, innovating, experimenting, and that really helped us, I think, emerge stronger at the end.
Jason, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for allowing me to sit here and get to know you and the business better. Thank you.
And thank you for the time.
And thanks to you, our audience, for watching this episode of CNBC Africa's Entrepreneurial Edge, where I was joined with Jason Inglis, the Chief Ecosystem Officer at CG Tech.